The orphans, this case came into light publicly around 91, 92. And it's a case of children that were abused in hospitals, in psychiatric hospitals. They weren't crazy, these orphans, you know. They were all sane children that were, that were placed into institutions, psychiatric institutions, in order to collect federal funds, you know. Most of the orphans, the women and the men, most of them, they were all given experimental drugs, from chlorpromazine, Lagatil, and Maldaril and Gardinal. I got talking with other orphans, women, and even in Quebec City and Montreal, going to their meetings, and I got to know a lot of people, and I was noticing their files, medical files, and their stories. It's unbelievable. You know, you can't just take 3,000 people and they haven't been together for probably 30 at the time, 30 years. And how could 30, let's say 3,000 people comes out of the, out of the darkness, and all have the same story, every one of them. You know, they were drugged, lobotomized, electroshocked, straitjacket, put into cells and beaten, and ice cold baths. Every one of them, all about identical stories, and without even seeing each other for, 25, 30 years. So how can someone not listen? They can't, 3,000 people cannot be all telling a lie. I believe, that somebody should have stepped forward, and, somebody in that government or any of the past governments or the president step forward and say, enough is enough, and acknowledge what happened. And this is Quebec history. One of the biggest cases, I believe, of children that were abused in institutions. The biggest write-up that we had was done by Christine Hahn, Freedom. This was the biggest article and the best.
Okay, good evening and welcome to the Monday, June 18th edition of the Investigative Journal. I'm your host, Greg Szymanski, here for the next 2 hours. And before I get to my guest tonight, Rod Vanneau from Canada, who's going to tell us a horrendous story about the Duplessis Orphans. And you're going to see in this story how the Catholic Church and the government of Canada and the United States teamed up together to torture thousands of children, and how this started over 40 years ago or even longer, and how there's a mass grave of thousands of these children still being covered up in Canada. We're going to get to Rod's story for the next 2 hours, and it's a horrendous one. But before I do that, I just wanted to talk about my website at arcticbeacon.com. That's ARCTICBEACON.com. You can go there. And with that, I'm going to spend the next 2 hours dissecting Rod Vanneau's story and having you, from the heart of a good man in Canada and his wife who suffered tremendously and still does over the hands of these evil people, and just tell you the story from the beginning. And if this doesn't wake you up, folks, nothing will. And, God says this: if you have the knowledge and you have the ability to do something and you don't, you will suffer the pains of hell along with the rest of them. So don't think you can just turn a blind eye after you listen to this show. You owe it to yourself to research things. You owe it to yourself to help your fellow man. And if you don't do that, you're going to go to hell just like the rest of them. Rod Vanneau, how are you today?
How are you? Hi, Greg.
Well, I'm doing fine, and I hope it's a little warmer in Canada now.
Yes, it is.
Yeah, good, because I know the last time we talked, I think the last interview we did, we both were under about 5 feet of snow, I think, because I live up in the Rocky Mountains.
Yeah.
But anyway, what I want to do Rod, I want you to start from the beginning in your own words. And on this 2-hour show, since it's a nightly show, we don't have as many commercials like I did at my morning show. So you're going to get a chance to tell the American people and the Canadian people this horrendous story. And I want you to not spare a word, because I don't think these people deserve any kind of, they don't deserve anything but you to tell the truth, so that people understand how evil, how this group of Catholics, how the Vatican, along with the governments, work together to torture children and kill many of them.
Yeah. Well, Greg, we were married about 26 years, okay? And up until 1992. And this story here about the Duplessis Orphans come out. And my wife, she told me, she says, I'm a Duplessis orphan. And I said, what? And this was coming over the news, on television, and the newspapers, and here was the orphans were coming out of everywhere. And they wanted justice, and so my wife, she had kept this silent all the time we've been together for 26 years at the time in 1992. So she told me the story. She said that her mom had fell sick, tuberculosis, at the time, back in the 40s, and they were staying in a little fishing village down in the Gaspé Peninsula along the St. Lawrence River in Quebec, Canada. And mother fell sick, so the family doctor placed her mother in a sanatorium for tuberculosis, and the father, he was a lumberjack, so a woodsman, and he had 5 children. So the doctor and the priest came to the house one day, and they said to Mr. Duguay, they said, listen, we would have a nice place for your 2 daughters, Simone, 7 years old, and Clarina, my wife, 9 years old at the time, at a Rimouski orphanage, which was somewhere about a couple of 100 miles away, 200, maybe 200 miles away from their family home. So he had no reason to doubt, like the family doctor, and so they came one day and they picked up the two girls, and they said they would be well looked after and would get a good education with the nuns at this orphanage here. So they were, the kids, they were crying.
What was the name of the orphanage again?
The Rimouski.
Okay.
Which is the name of a town, of a city now today. And
this was run by the Catholic Church, right?
Right.
Okay.
So they were both placed in this place here, and right away tortures started. They were put in the dark rooms, and for any little thing, and it was hard. They worked. They had to work from morning to night, in this orphanage all the time. So one day, when my wife was 11 years old, one of the nuns came along, and she just picked out a bunch of girls, and 10, 12 for them. Said, "We're going now. You girls you did good work, for about a month, and you behaved yourself. We're taking you out around the town in a bus." So they got in a bus, the bunch of girls, and maybe a dozen or more, and they ended up at about 300 miles away at this psychiatric hospital, the St. Julian.
Right.
And they ended up there, and the big doors shut. And
so the nuns, in fact, lied to these kids, right?
Pardon me?
They lied. The nuns lied to them and said they basically were doing well And what was the reason for putting them in a psychiatric institute?
Well, what I found in the records, that they claimed the mother. See, they had to justify, like placing Clarina. So they put in her. They claimed that the mother was crazy, and
Which
she was
not true. Correct.
Not true. No, no. We have all the medical papers and everything. No, she was really. She died of tuberculosis down in her. She had never even left her place there, down in the Gaspé Peninsula. And she
so
was
what I guess is going on here, they're falsifying records for thousands of children, your wife being one of them,
yeah.
Putting them in this orphanage, putting them in this psychiatric institute.
In the psychiatric hospitals, and then, they were falsely labeling them mentally ill, these kids here, and illegally, locking them away in psychiatric hospitals, which were all run by the nuns. And they were the sole proprietors of these institutions. All education and medical institutions all belong to the nuns.
Okay. So your wife, the next thing you know, she finds herself, she's a young girl in the psychiatric hospital, St. Julian's, right?
Right. So
where's that located so people know?
Would be about from Montreal. It's like down in the eastern townships there, from Montreal. It's a few hundred miles away.
And what year are we talking about now, just so we can get a reference of what time frame we're in?
We're 1947.
Okay. So now...
So she went into the orphanage in 1945.
Mm-hmm.
And 2 years later, she was 11 years old. So on the 23rd of October, 1947, she is transferred. A bunch of girls, they were all transferred to the St. Julian Hospital, psychiatric hospital.
And the best of your ability, explain in detail exactly what she went through and what others went through. And don't spare us anything here, because I think people need to hear the atrocities that went on in that psychiatric institute.
Okay, great. Automatically, when a person goes into one of these psychiatric hospitals, these kids here, not only were they labeled mentally ill, but it's automatically incurable, because, like my wife's in her medical, she's profound mentally ill. She raised 6 children. And also you have another label, which is dangerous to society.
Mm-hmm.
So all these people here, they still carry these mentally ill label. This was not repaired. So inside these institutions, they were put into cells. As kids, children, they were put into cells. They were straitjacketed. They were injected with chlorpromazine and so many other experimental drugs. They were whipped, tortured, worked from morning to night, and ice cold baths, and like my wife, and not only my wife, but to give an example, like tied right on a steel bed. With a collar around her neck and tied hand and foot, and put in a cell like this here and have to stay like this here,
Mm-hmm.
So, and this went on for years.
Too, right?
Pardon me?
Her sister was with her, right?
And 2 years later, so like I found out, 11 years old is about the year that, there was a lot of younger kids were at this hospital here. But
how many kids were there? Did she ever tell you? I mean, she might not have known the whole scope of the institute, but did she see a lot of kids being tortured and a lot of kids being killed?
Yeah, well, yes. There was 1,000 girls at this. At this place, there was only girls. So there was 1,000 girls. And, a lot of I've been talking just lately with some of the girls that were there, 15 years or 20 years, all their lives, they're teenagers, spending their lives in these institutions. But a lot of them, Alice Quinton, she was telling me just the other night, they witnessed this little girl. She was only about 5 years old, and they murdered her. They killed her. The little kid had this little girl, and she was ailing for something, and she was crying and crying because she was sick from something. And instead of calling a doctor or whatever, they just shut her up. They killed her. And there's so many kids that we found out later on, but there were so many witnesses to criminal acts like this, murders. And just the other night, this fellow here, Joseph Martin, I think he's 72, 73 years old, called me the other night, and he was on TV with this here in 1993. And I just sent this morning. I sent this to the Minister of Justice of Quebec again for so many times. This guy here, Marcel Barrette, the 5th of May, 1941, he was beaten to death. And there was a lot of Duplessis Orphans that saw this child, this young boy at 10 years old. He was kicked right into the chest, and the blood just poured right out of his mouth, his nose, his eyes, his ears. They killed him right there, and a month later, the same group of guards and did the same thing, Because some of these hospitals, Greg, had their own police force.
Okay.
Armed police force, And they had control of everything. No, even the Montreal police could not even go into this certain institution where once I talked about the Pigsty Cemetery, where these mass graves sites that up to over 2,000.
Well, we're going to get into that later on in the show because I want to be real specific about what happened to those grave sites and how they've been covered up by your government in complicity with our CIA. And we need to get into. So we have this. Obviously, complicit actions here between orphanages run by Catholic nuns, who are basically turning over children into the hands of these killers. And I bet you they were getting paid. Was there any money you guys ever found out was being passed?
Yeah, well, for sure. There had to be. There was money coming in from the federal government. The federal government was paying these institutions, and nobody from the federal government was checking in to see what was going on. And here they were labeling, thousands and thousands of innocent children that that could have been outside playing, getting education and everything else, but here they were slave laboring in these hospitals here, having to clean the real patients, and a lot of these. There's a lot of these young kids were beaten by what do you call these? Real mental patients. Sometimes right. They would get 3 or 4 of these mental patients to beat, on kids,
Yeah, and so what you have here is atrocities going on beyond that are unimaginable, really, but are true. There's so many of these orphans that have come forward. We'll get into that later on. But just one word. Your wife was there. Was she specific about what they did to her?
Well, yeah, she was sexually abused by a nun from the age from 12, 13, 14 years old, and she got ice cold baths. She was put in a straitjacket many a time. She was put in a cell, thrown in a cell, tied to a steel bed, having to wear a collar, hand and foot, and Just about, well, every night I think that she was saying that they would give this syrup. She got it in a syrup form, and Largatil, which is chlorpromazine, and that left her in this kind of a state, that she couldn't, she couldn't feel her lips, her mouth.
So she was being used as a guinea pig also on experimental drugs back at that time, right?
Yeah.
Amazing. And her sister went through the same thing?
And her sister went partly through the same thing. And
okay.
we don't know why, but one day they needed a girl at one of these schools where one of these training schools. So she was in there probably with maybe a year, in the psychiatric hospital, and they picked her, and she got out, and they sent her to this training school that wasn't too far away, maybe 15, 20 miles away, and
that's your wife's sister, right?
Yeah, and she was able. On a Sunday morning, she escaped when all the nuns were at Mass.
Well, listen, Rod, we're going to take a short 3-minute break here at the bottom of the hour. In the next half hour, I'd like to discuss exactly how your wife finally escaped, and also really the elements behind, who was involved, the doctors behind these atrocities. We'll be back in 3 minutes with my guest, Rod Vanneau.
All right.
Okay, we're back. Second half hour of the Investigative Journal, and 2 program notes I'd like to mention. Go to my website at arcticbeacon.com, and you can, on that website, go through a whole bunch of articles that starts to get to the bottom of who the real spiritual controllers of the New World Order are, without pulling any punches. And you need to go there and read some of these articles, and there's also a section that I've started on the website, which is called Hard to Find Books and Documents, and you go to that page, and you can find so many things that books that have been kept from us, as well as another section of movies you won't see on TV. And that's another section on my website, so you can click on that. Tell your friends, if you're listening to this show, to listen to the Investigative Journal. You can pick it up on Liberty Radio. It's replayed during the day a couple times, this show, as well as being on at night, and I appreciate that. Many people have told me they take advantage of the archives, as well as listening live to the shows during the day. So do that. You're not going to get these words, this type of message, in most places, anywhere. You're going to get nothing from the mainstream media, but they're outright lies. From most alternative media people, you're going to get half-truths, dodging the Jesuit and Vatican issue like the plague, because I believe that most of the bigger outlets in the alternative media are controlled by them, and I have first-hand knowledge of that by working with them. So when you want to find out the truth, you know where to go. It's thearcticbeacon.com. And I'm also running an auction. So if you have any items, anything at all that you'd like to donate, trying to raise some money, then I'll put it on auction. I have sold by auction my motorhome, which is a kind of a famous motorhome that brought Clotilde Mack to New Orleans when FEMA refused to bring her there. So we brought her there in my motorhome. We forced the senator in Louisiana to get her the FEMA trailer that she deserved, and she's one of the few people, 81-year-old Clotilde Mack, who was taken out of New Orleans, taken away from her home. She's one of the few people that are moving back into their home in the 9th Ward, and thanks to my motorhome, it happened. And also I want to mention this, that my motorhome is now being used by Common Ground Relief to house some of the relief workers who are still looking for many things to help people in New Orleans. If you have anything like that, they asked me if you have shovels, anything like that, outdoor equipment to help them, you can contact them through me at arcticbeacon@earthlink.net, and I'll get that. In fact, my motorhome will be there for a while, but it was sold at auction to another ministry, Tony Alamo's ministry, and he's going to use it for the good of the American people. So I'm glad for that, and that'll help keep the truth flowing from the Arctic Beacon. Okay, let's get back to my guest, Rod Bonneau. Rod,
yes.
Your wife goes through all these atrocities. She keeps it from you for 26 years, which must have been tough. How did you ever ask her why she didn't talk for all those years? Was she embarrassed?
Yeah, it's because she said she said to the family and to myself that she didn't want to traumatize the kids, our 6 children.
Right.
And she kept this to herself, and also she was ashamed, like many of the survivors, ashamed. Like they're putting they before knowing they were putting the blame on themselves, And like yourself, like I heard earlier, what you had stated. You said that you're making this here, fighting for justice, a lifelong, fight. Myself, Greg, I've written over 2,000 letters worldwide to, every kind of human rights organization, to every members of government, Canadian, Quebec government, even in the States and everywhere, just anywhere. To see if to get justice, because there is a conspiracy of silence, which exists still on today, and there is something we unburied a lot of stuff, but there could be stuff yet that we don't know. That could be very, very,
yeah. We're going to get into as much. I know there's a group of advocates fighting like you, and you're involved with them. You have probably stepped up more than most people to get to the truth of all these Duplessis orphans who were killed and tortured, and many of them still telling their story. In fact, I remember I had Pierre Sampson on.
Yeah.
Remember when he came on? And he was a Duplessis orphan that talked about the same thing your wife experienced, and we'll have him on again. I'm going to track him down. Yeah,
he called me about, I think it was just about 3 or 4 days ago.
Good. If you talk to him, tell him I will get in touch with him, and we'll do a follow-up show maybe later this week.
Yeah.
Since we're talking about the topic, and I'll have Pierre on because he tells similar stories of what happened to him, just the same that happened to your wife. So now your wife is a child. She's still going through these tortures. She's now been sold by the good nuns of Canada and the Catholic Church to these butchers in the St. Julian's Institute. How does she finally get out?
Well, look, when these kids were inside the institutions, they were at the mercy of all the psychiatrists and all the doctors who wanted to, nobody, these places here were, they were like prisons, And, my wife got out because of her sister being sent to this training school. And she escaped, there was no problem running away because she was just in an ordinary school and boarding school. And one Sunday she escaped from there. And she did finally arrive at her place hitchhiking, and she hopped the train and she got down to her place, and she told right away. She told her uncles and her family that that her sister Clarina was not in an orphanage but in a mental institution.
Okay, so she's one of the lucky ones. We
can see, lucky,
because she got away. Many didn't. Why don't we get...
so many died. So many murdered. So many died from experiments, lobotomies, and electroshocks.
And these are kids now, listeners, that have they're not mentally ill. Their records have been forged, and your wife's records are still they changed your wife's records, and still to this day she's classified as severely mentally ill, correct?
Severely mentally ill, profound ill.
Amazing. And there's thousands of others that still haven't gotten justice. I mean, so she goes for any type of job, any type of social interaction, and this is on her record, and the nuns falsified all this stuff.
Well, so many, still today, these, like these people here, like they're in their 50s or 60s or 70s and their 80s, and a lot of them fear when they do fall ill or they get sick, they're scared, Greg, to go to a hospital.
Right.
Scared that this label they'd be sent back in. Fear,
Yeah. Now, who are some of the people that you guys have been putting together an activist group trying to get at some justice here? But tell us who's involved in this, the doctors that you found out, who they were, and how it's been covered up by the American CIA and others in Canada and the church. Go ahead.
Yeah, well, we found out there's Ewan Cameron, okay? He worked in, he's the brain, the doctor known, throughout the world, for brainwashing, and at the Allen Memorial Institute in Montreal. And, he brainwashed and killed so many people at this place here. But we found there is a connection. We found that Ewan Cameron, Heinz Lehmann, who was at the Douglas Hospital, the Heinz Lehmann, he's the one, this Nazi doctor who came from Nazi Germany. He brought over the chlorpromazine in 1937. And he was good friends with, what's his name, Ewan Cameron.
And they were both involved at St. Julian's, right?
No, they were involved with the Douglas Hospital and the Allen Memorial, but also they were seen just about every other day at the Saint Jean de Dieu Hospital. Now, this was a place here. It was this hospital here, Saint Jean de Dieu. It's in the east end of Montreal. Okay, here's where there's a mass grave site. All right, this is where the Pigsty Cemetery is. And
so there was a number of these institutions that they were operating from, with protection from the CIA and the government, right? Right.
Yes. Because I have pictures, I found pictures. You can see like the Prime Minister of Canada with the church officials and the doctors and the psychiatrists, and they're all together, and So the funding came from the federal government and the CIA involvement, because I have records, where I found this here, this document here, where all our hospitals, and there's a check mark, and there's at least from 1922, it could have been earlier, but at least from 1922, our hospitals here in Quebec, they would get a certificate from the American Psychiatric Association, or the American College of Surgeons. Why? Each one of them, and there's a whole list of hospitals. The main ones where the kids were, and there's a check mark. Why were they giving these merit certificates of merit? And and some of these hospitals had train tracks, and they had their own trains, links, they were attached to the main line, and these tracks here were going right to the back of the hospitals and to the pavilions where all the kids were and everything. So anybody could come in and out, And there's also, we have now records that testimonies, that even Joseph Mengele, You know, Mengele would have been at the Saint Jean de Dieu Hospital. He was seen there.
Yeah, so we have Nazi connections.
Nazi connections, yes.
Protection by the American CIA and the Canadian intelligence, so that this goes on. These operations are never uncovered. Tell us basically how, you know, it's so difficult to say, you know, how they did it, everything that went on. But through all the people that have come forward, tell us why they still haven't uncovered this mass grave, even though people know there are thousands of kids buried. And tell us exactly where that site is and what the Catholic Church did to cover it up.
Okay, well, like we've been trying to get some people together from the States or anywhere. We need, you know, like one lawyer had told me, you know, Daniel Leiter, he told me, he says, Rod, he says, to get something done here on this case here, he says, always through justice, this has been blocked. You know, like the government is paying the judges, they're paying the cops, they're paying the politicians. It's just a corrupted, you know, and he says you would need a scandal, a big scandal. You know, maybe somebody from another country, it could be the States, anywhere, but we need, you know, help. It could be a film producer or whatever, and something big coming, you know, to Canada to take on this case here, you know. So here,
why do you think these hospitals? I think we talked about this before. You think that they set them up in Canada with the help of the American government because it was under the radar screen up there, correct? It was easier to get away with these atrocities, right? These experiments.
Well, yeah, for sure. You know, and I think during these war years, and you know, and then back in the 50s and the 60s, people were just picking themselves up, and they didn't know what was going on. They didn't see nothing what was going on, and here they had thousands and thousands of kids. Senator Jacques Hébert, who is a great friend to the Prime Minister Pierre Elliott Trudeau in Canada, he wrote a book. The scandal, the Bordeaux scandal. Bordeaux is a jail. It's a famous jail. And back in 1959, there was 820 kids in that jail who had never went through a court system, never went before a judge. They took kids and they parked them there. And in 1960, they built 44 sanatoriums. And there was no epidemic for tuberculosis, you know, in 1960. But they were building sanatoriums, and they were using these sanatoriums as psychiatric pavilions, and to keep pushing the kids. They were picking them up everywhere, and they were even going into public schools and taking them there.
Wow. So you get a huge, the Duplessis Orphans. It's such a sad story. Tell us.
And Greg,
go ahead.
Just 2 years ago, I was on radio in Montreal, and while we were on live, this guy here, he called up from his truck, and he said, "Listen," he said, "in 1953, he says I was in the Bordeaux jail, and he says I was just there for tickets, you know, and it's for 3 months, and he says I was, you know, like I'd spend my days walking in the wings. And here he says I go down the D wing, and I would look into these dorms here, and he said it was full of kids. Now he said there were some kids that had huge heads. Now, you know, believe it or not, you know, but this is something else I found out from other kids here where I stay here in Joliet. At this hospital here, they had kids with huge heads. What kind of experiments were they doing? And Paul St. Aubin, who lives down the street here, who was lobotomized himself and electroshocked, he told me that it was 1969 at the psychiatric hospital where they were holding him here in Joliet, they transferred all the big heads, what he called them, big heads, to the Laurentian Mountains. There's a hospital there up there that was hidden, and And this man here that had called in on the radio station, he said, all these children, what happened? He says, I want to know what happened to, where did they disappear to? You know, where are they buried? What happened to these kids that were at this this jail here, the Bordeaux jail in Montreal? And then I found out more than what the Senator Jacques Abad, federal senator, he said there was 820, but I found out that there was 1,327 orphans that were parked in that place, and they all disappeared. Great.
They all were being experimented on, most likely.
Well, sure.
Legally.
Yeah.
Yeah, amazing. Let's get into this the pigsty grave site.
Uh-huh.
And tell us what it is first, where it exists, and how come no one has tried to dig it up and to get to the bottom of all the bones there of all these hundreds of children that's been documented. Go ahead.
Okay, this mass grave site, it's on the line, the hospital line here in Montreal, the Saint Jean de Dieu Hospital. Okay, and the nuns, they try to say that their cemetery was 120 feet by, I think, 210. But there's some contractors and engineers later on, I think it was 1975 or something, check this out here, and it was bigger. It was, I think it was 220 by 300 and some odd feet, you know. That's,
and why did they call it the pigsty?
Yeah, so this was called a pigsty because the cemetery was right just next to a hog farm, okay? Their hog farm that they had on their land, and their land was so huge, the hospital land, it would start from the St. Lawrence River and go all the way up to this other river here, the Rivière de Prairie. They had over 800 acres of land, and they had their own police force, armed police force. Now, the Montreal City Police picking up, at the time, like a drunkard from picking up somebody or a homeless person. He could end up at the psychiatric hospital, but they would have to leave them at the gate. And any death inside that hospital was inquired on by the police force, the hospital police force. So nothing would ever get on the outside. So,
right, so they could cover everything up that was going on. And this cemetery wasn't a normal cemetery. It was just bodies thrown in a hole, correct?
In a hole, yeah. So we got Silvio Albert Day, who his job as an orphan, he would have to pick up the bodies like in the cells, and especially at on the 5th floor, I think, was where they used to do the operations and brain surgeries and stuff, and lobotomies. So a lot of them died. So he would have to bring them down to the cellar, to the morgue, and his job was to wash the bodies. And he complained that like the head, the top of the head, was just sliced, or he could see the brain was just falling out. And but a lot of the bodies were sold to the universities. So they would sell them to the University of Montreal, University of Laval in Quebec, the McGill University, and a lot of these bodies they were selling the bodies for $50 a body, and I imagine a lot of kids died, because they needed instead of rats and mice, well, they had healthy children, and they were experimenting on these kids.
Now, this guy named Silva, his job was to wash the bodies and take them into the mass grave, too, right?
Right, yeah. And so it's the orphans themselves that baptized this place here, the Pigsty Cemetery.
How many bodies are supposedly there? I know you've been researching this with attorneys and many of the Duplessis Orphans that are trying to get to the bottom, but have you figured out Is there any way to figure out how many bodies have been just
well, we have a number.
in the hole there?
Yeah, I have a document and I have a number. 2,000. There's at least this much here. There could be thousands and thousands, but at least 2,168.
All right. Now,
Okay.
here
so
we
that's
go.
a lot of people. That's
Right.
a lot of that's a lot of towns. And villages throughout the United States and even Canada.
Exactly.
That's a huge population.
So whatever happened to this, it's still there, but how did, I know the hospital was owned by the church, right? What
Right.
did they do? How's this been covered up? Why isn't there why haven't these bodies been exhumed?
Okay, in 1973, 74, all the institutions that belong to the church, the nuns sold back the hospitals back to the governments for millions and millions, and they tried to cover these places up here by like selling to the city for roads or highways. Mm-hmm. And the Pigsty Cemetery, there's still a part there, and they sold the what do you call it? The liquor board, the liquor commission belongs to the government, okay?
Right.
So they sold this to the where the factory is. So it belongs to the government again. It still belongs to this piece of land, and the liquor commission board. It's right. It's on part of the cemetery. And their fences all around. Well, it's inside their land. You understand?
Okay, so they're protecting it still. And weren't there some construction workers that?
Yeah, some construction workers. Yeah, not too long ago, really. I think it was '99, and the Liquor Commission Board had got in this construction. Just to extend their parking lot. And
Mm-hmm.
they had these just laborers. Working in, they had this guy here. He was just.
Hey, Rod.
Yeah.
Rod, if you could hold that, we'll continue. We'll pick up right where you left off. I need to take a 2-minute break at the top of the hour, and we'll be back on the Investigative Journal.
All right.
Back in 2 minutes. Okay, we're back on the Investigative Journal. I'm your host, Greg Szymanski. My guest is Rod Vanneau. And 2 program notes. Tomorrow on my show, I'm bringing back my old series, Average Americans Doing Above Average Things, and you're going to hear from 2 Americans that aren't afraid to stand up for who really are the problems of our country. And I'm not just talking about Bush, but people we talk about, the Jesuits, the Vatican, and these other people who are behind the scenes controlling you and me. And, I like bringing on just average people. They have nothing to hide. They have no hidden agenda like many other alternative media or media people that we talk to who aren't going to give you the straight scoop because they're too worried about their own pocketbooks. And they know that if they talk about the Jesuits, they'll be pulled off the air, just like I was. But I don't care. There's always going to be a place that God will make for you if you want to talk about the truth, because you can stop armies. You can always stop armies, but you can't stop the truth when it's ready to be told, and it's ready in America. So we're going to bring on 2 people with no hidden agenda tomorrow. They're going to tell you what they learned about the Vatican-controlled New World Order. Then on Wednesday, I have on Frankel Collins. He's written a historical view of the Vatican called The Almanac of Evil. It goes back to the beginning of time, works his way right up to the present, and I think you'll find him fascinating. He's from Australia, and he'll be with me Wednesday. Back to Rod Vanneau. Go ahead, Rod. So we have these construction workers who are now working at the pigsty. Go ahead.
Right. So this guy here, his job was he started raking and doing a bit of shoveling, and he started picking up bones. So he had hip bones, femurs, every other kind of bone, and so he brought the bones to, but him and the other workers, they noticed right away, that they were human bones,
Right.
and so they told the boss about it, and the boss, he says, we'll have them analyzed and everything else, and and that was the end of it. They said it was animal bones,
Right.
So that was, again, another cover-up, But this
and to this day,
here,
what's that?
I said this hospital here, this is one of the hospitals here, one of the main hospitals that had the railroad track, They had
Right.
their own locomotive, and, like we have testimonies like Paul St. Aubin, without him knowing, at the age of 7 and 8 years old, he would go to the nuns to the Windsor station. And they would bring 6, 7, 8 kids to the station, and then the other station wagon would be filled with boxes and their stuff, and they would bring them to the to the Windsor station, and they would board them on trains heading for New York and the New England states, Boston and wherever, So there's at least 200,000 kids that were adopted but sold, because we don't know really if they were all adopted, but we know that there was the international black market babies, Montreal.
So many of these were sold to people in America too, right?
Yeah, a lot of them in New York.
Okay.
But I believe that there was, because of our doctors, some of the doctors that were ministers in our parliament, Dr. Denis Lazure, who is still at this hospital where this gravesite is. He's still working there. He's 81 years old. This guy is just as if nothing ever happened. And he's been involved in this case all along. He was Minister of Health. He could have done something a long time ago. He was Minister of this and that. But this guy here, he was stopped once at the American border because he was over in the communist territory, what he was doing over there. And this other doctor, his friend, who became Minister of Health also, he was behind the Iron Curtain also, and over in Germany also, back in the early 50s. And but they were every other week, they were either in Philadelphia at the Philadelphia Mental State Hospital, or the Boston or Worcester. These three places, and one of them had worked there for quite a while there. So,
interesting. Go ahead.
So I believe a lot of our kids were transferred to fill the holes in at these places here, because I found out that one order of nuns that had one of the mental institutions, the St. Anne's in St. Paul down on the St. Lawrence River, they had this institution, the Worcester in Mass, belonged to them. And even today, right today as we speak, they still have holdings. They're collecting money because they were the owners of this hospital here.
Huh. So you think it's still going on today?
Well, they're still collecting money from this hospital here, from the state.
Okay.
Yep.
Okay. So they still have their dirty hands in the money for actually torturing people.
Yeah.
From your eyes, from your perspective, when you found out about this from your wife, I knew you took up the cause and will probably do it for the rest of your life. But through your eyes, tell us how this activist group, the Duplessis Orphans, got together, and what kind of progress you may have made since the beginning. Go ahead.
Yeah, okay. Well, I used to, besides being a construction worker and everything else, I was, songwriter, singer, songwriter, country music, Cajun music. And when my wife announced this here, my music career was going up, but I just stopped, and I got into, this case here for my wife. And then when I noticed that in our own place here, Joliet, there's around 20 orphans around here, and then there's so many everywhere else. So I thought, I said I'm going to give it a try, and I got into writing and everything to see, to get justice. But then I found there was so much corruption in the federal government, in the Quebec government, and, it's just cover up after cover up, and, it's so many lies and everything, So,
right. Go ahead.
I thought, I said to myself, well, I haven't got the means, if probably having a lot of money, maybe, winning a lottery ticket, maybe I could do something. But 6 years ago, I decided to write a book. I am not a writer, but I've written a book. I have it here. I have it on a what do you call these little gadgets? A key, what is it? And I have this, and my wife and I, we went to Montreal. I've contacted every publisher. Nobody wants to touch my book. They don't want to touch the story also.
Right, and then you've written this in French?
It is in French.
And that's your first language, right?
Yes.
Well,
it
English
is.
and French. You speak both,
yes,
right?
English and French, because I'm not from Quebec. I'm from the Maritimes. I'm from New Brunswick.
Okay. So in your book, you've documented this story, your wife's story. How many Duplessis orphans have come out of the woodwork since you began this search? Because I know you go public with this story. You've had demonstrations in Canada. But how many orphans have you found over the years?
Well, there's still a few thousand. There's still a couple of thousand at least. 2,000,
Okay.
2005. Yeah, there could be up to 3,000.
And tell us how justice
there's a lot of them. There's a lot of them very old. There's a lot that are, right now at this moment now in time, we could still get a good group together to tell their story.
Right. And we've talked about Pierre Sampson, who will come on the show. Then we've talked about the one Duplessis orphan whose job was to put the bodies into the pigsty, into the grave site that's still being covered up by the government and the Catholic Church. And I asked this question, Rod, and it's a very simple question because let's deal with this. Many people criticize me in America for accusing the Vatican of all these evils and being involved in this. And my question is very simple. If they are a good organization, they should be helping you get to the bottom of these atrocities because they were involved in them. And if it was just a rogue group in their church, they would help. But they don't. They cover it up and, in fact, make millions by selling the grave site to the government. So this, to me, shows they are an evil organization. Just another reason to start looking into, really, their hidden activities, correct?
See, like our Cardinal, Jean-Claude Turcotte of Montreal, he one time stated, he says, there's no involvement of the church in, he says, nowhere. And he says, and he come publicly, he says, you will never see any nuns or anybody from the church on a medical file or one of the, from the psychiatric hospitals. My God, I just looked in my wife's medical file, and I think I found, just in one shot, I think there's 7 or 8 signatures right in the medical file, So, and there was a lot of other orphans, and this one time when he had come publicly, he says, show me the proof. And he says, I will do something, So when we went to his, we demonstrated, we went to the Archbishop's place, and in Montreal, we had, I think it was 250 medical files, and with proof that there was signatures from the nuns and different other people from the church. And no, he wasn't there no more because he had taken the plane. He knew we were coming, so he took the plane. He went to South America.
So basically, he's lying.
He is lying. Yes, he's lying, and he's.
If he's a church, if he's a high cardinal in the Catholic Church, and we're involved with the Vatican, why he can be considered nothing more than evil if he doesn't come to your assistance to help get to the bottom of the story.
And the same thing, the same goes for the Pigsty Cemetery. I have the clipping, in the newspaper where he states, he says, I will, when this came out here publicly, when we brought this out here, he says, I will look into this. I will look, and he says, I will check the whole thing out. This was smoke, my friend. This was the end of it. This, we never heard no more about this to the Cardinal,
Right. And is he still the cardinal there?
He is still the cardinal.
Now, you've written over 2,000 letters. Document some of the responses that you've gotten from Canadian officials, American officials, church officials, etc. Go ahead, Rod.
Yeah, I received beautiful letters, all trimmed, a lot of them trimmed in gold. Governor General of Canada, the Prime Minister of Canada, even Bill Clinton. I've got the letters from everywhere, and but it all either they're just passing the puck on to another one, to somebody else, or they acknowledge and say, okay, we acknowledge. There's only one who is the Prime Minister of Quebec today, Jean Charest. This guy here, and I will always drive this into and he knows me, and when we do see each other through sometimes the election campaigns and we run after him, he runs in the other direction. Because, he stated in his letter to my wife, and he was the opposition leader at the time, and he says, he stated that, if he ever gets into power, that he would repair this case, the Duplessis Orphans, But when he did become Prime Minister, he did like the rest of them,
Right. So basically, you've documented a huge cover-up because none of these people have ever done anything over the years, right?
No, yeah, and, and I found out also throughout the years that a lot of these government officials, either their sisters or mother or fathers, they worked in the psychiatric institutions. So these are all people that could do something, like you were saying also with like the church. There's one nun that came publicly, and she's from Quebec here. She worked at the St. Julian Hospital, and this also came out in the New York Times. And who's this writer? He was the chief editor, Anthony De Palma, New York Times. And you can somebody can pick this up here and check this out here. And her name is Georgette Hayfield. This is her name, and I don't remember her name as a nun, but she was there just a short time, and she went and see the Mother Superior, and she says, "My God," she says, "I came here to work." She says to give all my love, and to the kids, these girls here, only babies, and and young girls. And I want to give everything every hour of the day to these kids here. But she says, to see, and somebody telling me that I've got to put a straitjacket on a child and put her in a cell. She says, I can't take this. And take a whip with these lead tongs or these lead pellets and whip these kids here. No, she says, I cannot. So they kicked her out of the order. And she's still alive, but she's living in poverty. They really threw her out of the pack there,
Well, they've probably kept her in poverty and threatened her if she ever goes forward, basically.
Well, yes, because just lately I heard, Alice telling me that, she had said Alice Canton is one of the survivors that was there with my wife at the same time, and they know each other. And Alice was saying that the nun had, she says what Alice Quinton stated, she says it's all truth,
Mm-hmm.
Like,
this is a good time for me to mention something here, because I have a number of listeners in France, and I always, people in France, a number of people contact me and say, boy, could we ever get your show translated? Can we ever get something that would document this show in French? Because we don't get anything like this over there. There's a crackdown on freedom of speech in France. And so I do get French listeners, but many who don't speak English. So if there's anybody in France that'd be interested in publishing Mr. Vanneau's book, please contact me at arcticbeacon@earthlink.net, and I'll get you in touch with Mr. Vanneau, who's written this book in French and can't get it published. Perhaps we can get it translated in English and bring this out. Maybe I can be of some assistance, along with anybody in Canada that speaks French. Maybe we can help Rod get his book published. Secondly, if there's anybody in France that speaks English, understands this, and wants to be a mirror website of mine, and what a mirror is, you computer geeks will know this. You take my website and you put it in your language, and you can have everything done, and so people in other countries can read. So if there's any mirrors out there that want to do that in any countries, Italy, France, Germany, other places, please contact me at arcticbeacon@earthlink.net, and you can become a mirror of my website in your country. Because we do get a lot of listeners from all over the world. Most of them, of course, will need to speak English to understand this, but if there's anyone that wants to be a mirror and put this website...
This would make the scandal. I am sure my book would make a scandal. Listen, right. I didn't... any name of a person or government official or whatever. If I just didn't mention his name, because if I mention his name, it's because he's involved. You know? Right. And I have the proof to cover everything that is in my book.
Now, let's see if we can get this thing published, Rod. We talked before, and then as life is, we get so busy at times. But I'm going to find somebody that can translate this into English, and maybe we can get it published and
you know, Greg,
help support the Duplessis Orphans.
Greg, you might laugh, or maybe the people might laugh, but you know what I picked up 2 days ago in our newspaper? That here in Montreal, in 6 hotels, they'll be going... Now, you know, people could laugh all they want, but, you know, I'm going to mention it. You know, there's a group from the States. It's called, like America's Got Talent. So it's Talent Search America, you know. And they've got a website there, and they're going to be in the hotels. Well, my wife and I and a couple of orphans, I am going there. Not because I'm going to be doing any singing or whatever. I'm bringing that book. I'm bringing my stuff, and I want to show. I want them because I'm going there to see. And it's tomorrow night at 6:30. I'm going there to see if I can find a producer or someone that could give us come to, you know, and help us.
Right, and you guys really deserve it. That's a good idea. It's nothing to laugh about, because you know as well as I do, the powers that be do not want this story ever published. And tell us about what they've done to you personally. I know they've tried to harass you over the years, haven't they?
Over the years, yes, they did. During the 11th, the September thing in New York, you know. A couple of weeks, 2 or 3 weeks later from the 11th of September bombing, I had written a letter to the Premier, which I did different times. But this time here, it was a policeman called me, you know, and he said he was a sergeant or whatever. And, you know, he says, you wrote a letter. He says, this is the Quebec security and high security. And he said, so I said, yeah. So I said, he says, you wrote a letter to the Premier of Quebec. I said, yeah. So he says, yeah. So I said, how come my letter's there and not with the Premier, you know? So he says, the letter was sent to us because there was kind of spots on it or whatever. And I says, you know, so right away I thought of anthrax, you know. So
right.
They went to this, you know, to intimidate me. And I told him, I said, no. I says, never, sir. My letters are impeccable. They're so white, and they don't leave my place anyway dirty, you know. So
exactly.
And another time also, you know, the RCMP, the Royal Canadian Mountie Police, they parked for a month and a half, just, you know, against the house, you know, where we're staying. And, you know, there was no getting rid of them. They had a tape recorder. So I imagine they were taping what we're, you know, what we're talking on the phone and what we're receiving. Because probably was all new to them that, you know, that a Canadian citizen would write, you know, letters that they don't usually get, you know. So right. I was writing with the truth. So you know what I mean. So I was going to town on these guys here, you know. So
now these atrocities occurred for several decades back, starting in the 40s through the 70s, 80s. What do you think's going on today? I know this story. We've had Christine Hahn, a journalist, also that's covered this story. So there is some coverage. Now, has that changed their plans on how are they still experimenting on wayward orphans? What do you think?
Well, Christine did a lot of, and Tom Whittle, but Christine Hahn that I worked with, for about 6 years, and
right.
Such a sweet girl, and and she helped us a lot, and she discovered herself a lot of stuff, but we know there is still a lot of survivors still living in the hospitals. I don't know if they'll ever be able to get out. They're old today, but but I think they're still doing it to the kids. They're putting in the kids in the centers, and they're using Ritalin and every other drugs. So you know what I mean? It's just another way. It's always experimental.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Now, talking about your wife. At this particular juncture, is there any possible way to get her records changed? Has any lawyers come forward or anybody to help so that she could now feel free of what they've done to her, at least on paper?
No, because every, I would say 98%, at least 98% of the orphans are on welfare, and all the Canadian Charter of Rights, the Quebec Human Rights Commission, nothing applies to the Duplessis Orphans. We could not use this. We cannot use it today. And the orphans were never allowed. See, we're in Canada here, We're in America. So, and the orphans are not allowed, even on welfare, not allowed to get a legal aid lawyer, for this case here. Some of the orphans went to, I know one orphan 52 times, some, a dozen times. Myself and we went at least a dozen times to, we put up every argument, that you're not allowed, while these legal aid lawyers are paid by the government, and the government sends out the, you do not touch this case. That's it.
Right. What about the American connection here? What have you found out?
Well, we found out, a lot of our doctors worked, in the psychiatric hospitals over there. There's the connection with the CIA, and
Ewan Cameron, of course.
Ewan Cameron, yeah, and one of the last survivors, what's her name, Janine Huard. She was just paid out here under the table, a settlement just about 2 weeks ago. She had a lawyer, Alan Stein.
Okay.
And she was one of the victims there from Ewan Cameron. And back in 1988, she had received, I think, $67,000, and she's 78 years old or something like this here, and she said no. She says, she believed that this was not enough money to pay what the atrocities they had done to her. So she went back again, and she just won her case about 2 weeks ago. So
right. And what were some of the atrocities done to her?
Well, it was brainwashing. This what they were doing, And there's another thing we heard also, and I've got a few documents on this here. It's in Plattsburgh, New York. It's only an hour's drive from Montreal, But the Air Force base there, apparently, that they would have, sub-level, floors, and as much as, some of the orphans would have been tortured there on the 18th sub-level.
18 levels below?
Below.
Whoa. And so you have documentation that there were some orphans even taken to the New York, what was it, Plattsburgh, New York?
Plattsburgh Air Force, yeah.
And what did you find out? Keep going. Go ahead. I didn't mean to interrupt.
Yeah, that this Air Force, that a lot of the kids were being experimental on at this Air Force base, and also different other Air Force and Army bases throughout Canada and United States. And especially for in case of wars or whatever. But they were using the kids and they were testing the kids. Here they had the healthy children, so they had the best guinea pigs to test mustard or any other stuff that any chemical
Yep. So basically, using kids as guinea pigs, even connection from Canada to the States through the CIA, the Vatican, and I think, Rod, we'd be naive to think what's going on. What's going on in the world today after 9/11. The other things going on, the laws changing in America to the point where our personal freedoms are being just hijacked. We'd be naive to think, documentation of Nazi war criminals working in our Homeland Security, which I don't even know why they call it Homeland Security. That's a German term. But we'd be naive to think that all these experiments aren't still going on, that they're building all these underground camps and concentration camps. For what reasons?
Well, sure, Greg. They brought over, they let in over 3,000, these German scientists, and and they were working for the Third Reich, so, and a lot of them came to Montreal and Toronto and the big cities. So and the best place where these people.
Rod, let me. I don't mean to interrupt, but I need to take a 3-minute break. We'll be back with Rod Bonneau.
Okay.
All right, we're back. Final half hour with Rod Bonneau, and I hope you listeners that will pick up this show even after the show and listen to the tapes. I hope this story sinks in, and what it shows is that history will repeat itself. Our borders are not protected, and America and Canada, in my estimation, are being assaulted by the New World Order. This is just one of the ways. We need to unite, and that is Canadians, Americans, for the good of our countries, not for allowing these people to cross borders for these illegal actions and get away with it. I've contacted a couple U.S. politicians over this story, and you know what they say? Well, it's a Canadian problem. And I say, no, it's not. It's an American problem, because it also was, we were involved in this, and they don't want to touch it either here, Rod.
Yeah.
Because I believe the same thing goes on under the radar screen in our country, and it will get worse as time goes on. What do you think about what's happening in the world right now? How does this story, can you put your story together with what's going on in the world now, and what you think will happen if good people don't get together and stop what's happening?
Listen, Greg, just before I had forgotten to mention that the Duplessis Orphans, you had the orphans that were, there were so many kids that were sold on the international black market, okay? And then you had, there's 100,000 that is directly, that were sent into psychiatric hospitals for experiments. And, and then there's another bunch of orphans they're called the farm labor orphans. So so the hundreds and hundreds of orphans were sent on different farms throughout Quebec. And they would be slave labor, and some would die right in the fields. These kids here, like Paul St. Aubin, who worked 6 years on a farm. And from there, they sent him to the psychiatric hospital here in Joliet, and excuse me, and where he was lobotomized and electroshocked, and he was forgotten by the state for 18 years. So there's 24 years of his life, and so many. And I'm fighting this here because all these survivors, these kids here before. They went through so many criminal acts that were done to them, you know, and they're getting away scot-free, all these people here, you know. And they're just waiting that the kids, these people here just die one after another, you know. You know, there's always a bunch that dies every year, you know, they're getting old, and a lot of them are giving up. A lot of them are giving up because of their age, and they feel there's no more, you know, and I, you know, I'm in contact with a bunch, and I'm always telling them, you know, there's something coming, something will come. You got to keep on, you know, having hope, and, you know, somewhere, you know. And, you know, and in the listeners, if, you know, I have this book, I've written a song. I've written a song, you know, about the great darkness. Children of the
Okay, well, tell us a little. What's the title of your book?
Children of the Great Darkness.
Okay, and tell us what you do. Just outline what you've done in your book. Go ahead.
Well, I started, you know, like I'm not a writer, but I said, you know, like people from you know, out of the country. I said, you know, I thought I'd go right to the beginning, you know. Way to the beginning, and who started what, and the movements, and you know, and it starts way back there, and you know, like and I just kept coming up year after year, and everything that I could find, every pictures. Now something just interesting, you know, that I haven't seen before. I've got an old picture here, and there could be 25 or 30 young boys. They're at this hospital where the Pigsty Cemetery is. But as I looked at these boys here, 25 or 30, one is he's a colored boy. So I was thinking last week, I was saying, my God, I wonder if I could get the colored people to find out what happened to this kid here. And then we have natives also. So there was all walks of, they didn't care, you know, they just, anybody, any child, or, you know, from all walks of life were experimented on. But the thing is, we don't know what happened. Where are the grave sites? We know there's a massive grave, but, you know, where are the names? Where are the medical files? You know, where are the death certificates? We're supposed to be, you know, we're supposed to be civilized people here, you know?
Yeah, and that's, you know, it's amazing that, and like I said, the question I had for you earlier, I'd like to ask you again. Since 9/11, the state of Canada, the state of America, and you see all our rights being dwindled away, what's your thoughts about what's going on and what people can do to right the ship, so to speak?
Well, since all the years I've been in this case here, you know, I've got no, to me, politicians, I don't know if there's any politicians that's really honest. You know, I don't believe so. There might be, you know, there could be politicians that are honest before getting in, you know, into power. Once they're into power, they get into this, you know, and they're the same across the border, you know, without mentioning names. But here in Canada, it's the same thing. You know, they're so nice, whatever. And once they get in there, it seems that if you talk about a kid, you talk about, you know, our fundamental rights and, you know, values, they don't care about this no more. You know, it's just power and power. And I don't know what we could do to, you know, to change these people, change this way, this system of always the same. You know, okay, the kids were put in a straitjacket before, but we are today in a straitjacket. We are hostages, you know, every day. You know, they've got the power, and, you know, we say, well, our government, it belongs to the people. I don't think so. You know, once they're there, I think the government is completely aside from the people. They do whatever they want.
Yeah, and what you said, the politicians in your country and my country are no different. The problem with this story is that none of them are ever going to come forward because they'll know they'll be killed if they do. And so they play the game along with the Vatican. Now, the Vatican has dirty hands in this story, and they know it. And if any politician in our country would stand up to the Vatican, I would then lay some hope out, but there's not one of them. And I get emails constantly, oh, we should support Ron Paul. All of these guys are dirty. And I keep telling people, do not let them take you down the wrong rabbit holes, because they're not going to do anything. And this story is a perfect example. If Ron Paul and even your most liberal politicians got behind you and put out the real truth and helped you get to the bottom of all these, the Vatican and the government complicity and the CIA and everything, then I would say we might have a hope. But you know as well as I do, Rod.
Because the other day I wrote a letter. I wrote a letter to the politicians, and I told them, I said, you have no right. You have no right to be in Parliament and to represent us as long as you've got on your conscience that all these criminal acts that were done to the kids, and you know about it, and and then you walk into Parliament and you're talking about this and that and everything else. You have no right to represent it because you're accomplice to the what happened.
Yeah, and I say the same thing to the American politicians, and that's why I think they all ought to be ousted, because they're hiding the truth and they're supporting the New World Order.
Right.
And they play this left-right, liberal, conservative game, and all of them need to realize if the American people and the Canadian people stood up against them, we're millions. They're only a few, but they have the fear of, they put the fear into people so that no one...
They put the fear into people, right. I wrote a letter once to John Paul II, okay? And this letter, I really put it. I still have the letter, and it's a very, humble letter. And I went out to his heart and everything. And all of a sudden here, inside of a month, here in the same month, all of a sudden, well, I had sent a copy to a few of the politicians. I thought maybe they're, and to the Cardinal. I said, maybe it might touch somebody's heart, Well, you know what they did? The Cardinal, the Premier, other members of Parliament, they all took off to Rome all of a sudden to see the Pope. So, and all the ones, and a few of really dirty politicians. So they must have went and see John Paul, and they must have said, well, listen, everything's under control. We're running the thing, and this is some guy, he's shooting off his mouth about kids being tortured and everything else, and you know what I mean? So
exactly.
And then probably also another thing also, the existing Pope now. I believe some of my letters didn't even get.
What did you say in your letter to Pope John Paul II?
Yeah.
What did you say to him in the letter?
Well, I explained to him, in a way. I just explained to him that, like all the institutions, the hospitals were under the church, and that all these thousands of kids that were tortured, and experimented on and everything, and
nothing was done, and
nothing.
They had a meeting.
What happened? Some of our politicians, they all took off to. They all went to Rome.
Yeah, another example of if they were a good organization, the Vatican, they'd have came to your assistance. Now, listen, let me read something about John Paul II. He's firmly in the hands of the New World Order, was in the hands of them. He comes from my country, Poland. And let me just read you some history about him. In the early 1940s, the IG Farben chemical company employed a Polish salesman who sold cyanide to the Nazis for use in Auschwitz. The same salesman also worked as a chemist in the manufacture of poison gas. This same cyanide gas, along with Zyklon B and malathion, was used to exterminate millions of Jews and other groups. After the war, the salesman, fearing for his life, joined the Catholic Church and was ordained a priest in 1946. The salesman was ordained Poland's youngest bishop in 1958 after a 30-day reign. His predecessor, that was John Paul I, and we've documented on this show why he was killed, because he was going against these people. After a 30-day reign and his predecessor was assassinated, an RX cyanide gas salesman assumed the papacy as John Paul II. This information is backed up by various credible sources, including the Vatican's own website. So, this is the kind of man that you sent the letter to. And the whole system in the Rome is controlled, and they are basically working with their minions in the New World Order all over the world. They have huge wealth.
That story, Greg, sounds a little like, a bit like the, what's his name, Ratzinger.
Right.
You know?
Yeah, now, well, yeah, he was, in fact, a German Nazi youth.
You know, so
yeah.
It's really, it's really unbelievable.
Yeah. Yeah. Amazing stories. The connection between Mengele and the Bear Aspirin Company, it's incredible. I'm reading stuff now about it. Mengele being poor. Mengele's experiments that you talked about were basically involved, controlled by the Rockefellers. It's amazing when you start looking into the connections. Exactly.
And the Rockefellers, they put in a lot of money here, right here in Montreal, at the Royal Victoria Hospital, which is the pavilion, the Allen Memorial, where Ewan Cameron was doing all his experiments, and
Yeah, and then we have the Farben Company, the IG Farben Company, connected to Bush's, to Prescott Bush, George H. Bush's father, and his Nazi connections. And so if you just connect the dots, you have a president who is a Nazi right now.
Yeah, well, it's just unbelievable. And here in Canada, like Stephen Harper, our Prime Minister of Canada, well, what they say about him, well, that he doesn't want to move unless he doesn't. It's always Bush, so they just call him another Bush or his younger brother or whatever,
Right. So the people, your Prime Minister takes his marching orders from Bush.
From Bush.
Bush takes his marching orders from the Black Pope in Rome. The White Pope takes Ratzinger takes the Black Pope being the Jesuit general, Father Hans Kobenbach, and so goes life, and they're all working together at the top levels, and I think we can see that in just Canada and America. Canada will never, your politicians will never step over the Bush line, correct?
No, this is for sure.
Yeah,
but,
and I was talking to a friend yesterday, and she told me, she said, what's wrong with American people? I mean, it's very simple. If you don't think there's a if you don't think these people want to kill millions and have killed millions and are killing millions, a good example is, why isn't Bush impeached? I mean,
yeah,
because the whole Congress is corrupt in America and the Senate. And there's not one person you can rely on. You can't talk about the Vatican in this country. Do you realize that, Rod?
No,
I mean, publicly, you will not get this story on the air because you know why? It'll implicate the Vatican, and these are the real controllers through their many minions and all their billions and trillions of dollars in wealth and land. Through the centuries, all they've ever wanted was a fascist government, and they're going to get it here soon. What's your thoughts about 9/11? I always wanted to ask you from a Canadian's point of view.
I believe it's going to happen again, bigger, and I think it's going to hit the Canadians now because of their implication in Afghanistan. We used to be Canadians might have been hypocritical. I don't know, but like the Canadians used to go to different countries and be peacekeepers,
Mm-hmm.
But then the other Prime Minister, Paul Martin, who his father was involved in the Duplessis Orphans because he was the one that was giving out the monies at the time,
mm-hmm.
And with Stephen Harper, and they're sending soldiers now to fight, and they create wars, and I believe they create wars, well, not only for power and other stuff, but it's, like the father, George Bush. It's a way to, they can extract billions of dollars out of the treasury, and nobody knows where the money is going. And but
it goes right back into their. It goes right back into their pockets.
Right, and there's so many
through the sale of arms.
But so many innocent, young men and women are dying for nothing. If this was real wars, but they create. George Bush, he must have told his son, "You want some money? You want a lot of billions? Create a war." And I think he wasn't there too long that he created this, And Harper,
and the war. The people working together all over the world are creating these wars, and they create them, and then they end them, and then they start them again, and the people die. And this one might be the last one. People talking about the World War III. If the Middle East conflict continues, we're not going to see a free America or free Canada.
Greg,
no longer.
Tell me, Greg, what about what's his name, Michael Moore, the producer?
Yeah, Michael Moore. To me, I believe Michael Moore is working right alongside with them, because I'd make it a very simple point, he will not deal with these major issues. What I mean is this. You get a lot of people in America who are fighting for 9/11 truth, Michael Moore bringing up all the bad things about the Bush connection, and then we'll get into the story about insurance fraud and all these things we know about. But Michael Moore, to me, is a sellout, because I just make one simple determination, and I say this. After researching the Vatican and their connections to the New World Order and their downfall, what they do all around the world and in our country, if you don't deal with them and publicly expose them and all the people that work for them, then you'll never get to the truth. Now, Michael Moore is an intelligent man, and I make this judgment. Okay, let's ask him some questions. Why don't you deal with the Vatican issue publicly? He won't. And the reason he won't, there's only 3 questions you ask yourself. One, he's informed, correct? All right? If informed, then what is he hiding if he can't discuss this? 2, is he a coward? Okay? No, because he's a public figure. He's not afraid to talk about Bush and all the connections to Osama bin Laden. So he's not a coward. So the only other determination is, if he's informed and doesn't deal with the facts, doesn't deal with history, can't even deal with the Abraham Lincoln assassination and Lincoln's words, and if he's not a coward and afraid, then he must be working with them. Because their main goal is to always deflect attention from the real evildoers. And your story is an example. Ask Michael Moore to cover it. Write him a letter. I'd love you to write him a letter. You can find his website. What did he say?
I did, and I didn't get no reply.
Very good. I'm glad you said that publicly, because that tells you who Michael Moore really is. He's working with them. He's making millions off of those movies he makes, folks.
Yeah.
He never gets to the real problems.
Well, I was seeing this here just about 3 weeks ago. I think his movie Sicko, I believe maybe, just maybe, I gave him an idea, the idea of this, making this movie. Instead of coming, to the rescue of the orphans case here, the Duplessis Orphans, because I had asked him, a few years ago, and I sent him more than one letter, to come to our rescue, and I was talking about the psychiatrists and the doctors and the church and everything. So probably must have said, well, he might have checked it out, and then.
But if he was honest, he would talk about the Vatican, and he would, at least write you back, go public, and say, yes, I understand.
Yeah, sure.
But he will not deal with it because, in my estimation, he's getting paid millions to deflect the real problems.
Yes.
And these kind of gatekeepers like Michael Moore, make an awful lot of money, and they never want to deal with the truth. And I'm glad you mentioned that on the show, that you contacted him, because you know what? I think your story is much more valuable than his last movie. And if he had any guts and he was telling the truth to the American people, because he's not dumb. He can figure this story out like I have, like many other researchers have.
For sure.
And he doesn't. Why? Because if he did, he'd be dead, or he'd lose every penny he had, because the Vatican controls him. And if he wants to come on and talk to me, he never would, because he's too much of a big shot being paid by them. And it's other people like him. I mean, there's these guys on these alternative shows that do the same thing, that make a lot of money, and are being paid to do it by the Vatican. And that's the problem.
Reporters and,
Connects the Vatican, all these atrocities, to the CIA, to Nazi doctors experimenting, killing young children, is just covered up.